Go.
Jump back over here now?
Yeah.
For the 16th time. My name is Kevin Garrity. I'm the Vice President of the Dundalk Patapsco Neck Historical Society. And one of my interests is cemeteries. I love to go through them. I love to learn the history of it. I love to try to learn something about the people who were planted there. And it's a little weird, but that's what I do. So what I want to talk to you today is about Oaklawn cemeteries. Everybody know where Oaklawn is?
Is it on Taylor Avenue?
It's on Eastern Avenue,
Eastern Avenue, oh, okay.
right near Interstate 95, right over the Baltimore County line. It's 100 acres of natural beauty, as they say. Oaklawn was founded in 1903. The founding father of Oaklawn is this gentleman, who's named James Young. James Young is from one of the old Baltimore families. He married a Gorsuch, and not a Sparrows Point Gorsuch, but one of the Towson Gorsuches. He was the secretary for many years of the Maryland Institute, now called the Maryland Institute College of Art. He was a Shakespearean scholar. And he wanted to have a housing development, so he bought the 100 acres along Eastern Avenue, and he was going to, that's James Young in his later days. He called the development Elsinore. Does anybody know what Elsinore is? Yeah, I didn't either. It's a castle in Hamlet. Hamlet. Shakespeare's Hamlet. So the housing development didn't sell, and eventually they came up with the idea to turn it into a cemetery. James Young was the first president of the cemetery. This is a monument to him at Oaklawn, although he's not buried in Oaklawn. He's buried at Green Run Cemetery. Beautiful monument when you come in to get him. This is a copy of his, he published a literary journal called the Baltimore Telegram. And he was also a printer, had a very successful printing business. He was also a member of the House of Delegates in the 1880s. He was a state senator, and he was almost a congressman. He lost by about 60 votes. And what do you think that is?
Elsinore.
Very good. That's Elsinore. This is his son, Thomas Gorsuch Young, who, after James Young died, became president of Oaklawn for 30 years. And he has a monument right on the building there. He was the president of the Maryland Institute College of Art also. This is their other son. His other son is James Young Jr. James Young Jr. Acquired his father's interest in Shakespeare. Are we having camera problems?
No, we're having operator problems, okay?
Wait
a minute, in my defense, I'm getting these messages to say there's a commercial power issue in the area that's affecting you, so, okay.
There are no ghosts in this house.
Yeah.
I keep thinking there are not, but then weird things keep happening. Anyway, James Young Jr. Became an actor. He was a Shakespearean actor. He found success on the stage in New York, then London. Then he moved to Hollywood and became a director of silent movies from about 1913 to 1928. Got nothing to do with Oaklawn. This is one of his movies called Unchaseable. It's kind of racy. This is about 1924. And that's the last movie he directed. When talkies came in, he left town and went back to lecturing on Shakespeare. Died in 1949, also not buried in Oaklawn. Also buried in Greenmount Cemetery. But that's a little bit about the Youngs. There's a Medal of Honor winner who's buried at Oaklawn. And he's Charles Hazelton Hammer. He was a flyer. He's a graduate of Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. World War I, he was fighting on the Italian front which is a little known front in the war. And he was flying one of these things. It's called a Maki. It's a very early seaplane. And what he did, there was a dogfight. One of his friends got shot down and landed on the water. And Ensign Heyman landed his plane on the water, draped the guy over, took off. And it was something that the plane was not supposed to be capable of doing. But he did it anyway. A year after the war, he was killed in a flying accident. So that's the Heyman. Right. There are a couple of Civil War veterans who are married in Oaklawn. This one is Charles Rarick. It's a really cool monument, as you can see. This is sort of a clay thing of him on the front that I think their mowers chipped the top off of. He was in the artillery, Civil War, Alexander's battery of Baltimore Artillery. His wife's on the other side, and his daughter, Elizabeth. His big moment in battle came the Battle of Monocacy, July 1864. What happened was part of Lee's army under Jubal Early came out of Virginia. Their main objective was to take Washington, D.C. And they came up, were met by a scratch force of troops out of Baltimore. The commanding general's named Lew Wallace. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? He wrote Ben-Hur after that. So the artillery unit that Mr. Rarick was in was the only artillery that could scrape together with 6 cannons. And they held the Confederates off for about 12 hours. They finally took the field about 6 p.m., delayed their advance to Washington long enough so that some of the elements of the Army of the Potomac could come up and relieve them. So, similar to the Battle of North Point, it was a defeat that led to a victory. That's the Raricks, Charles, Mary, Elizabeth in the back. His occupation was a blacksmith after the war. He was, you see he's wearing a Grand Army of the Republic badge. This is their 50th wedding anniversary. Don't they look happy? They lived on Bank Street from about the year 1900 to his death in 1928. And this is their house on 1740 Bank Street. Still there. And like I told you, I'm weird. Whenever I go by, I take my hat and say hello to Mr. America. He's right down the street from my vet. He was supposed to be a wonderful man, wonderful family. They took in orphans. They tried to help some of the relatives. Believe it or not, back then a lot of people had drug problems. They were constantly trying to help people. It's a wonderful reputation. And before we leave Bank Street, while I was taking this picture, this is quintessentially Baltimorean.
Can you read it?
Says the neighbors have better stuff. This is one of the people I'm very interested in, and one of my life goals is to actually find a picture of him. His name is Martin Homburg. Trying to get there. Oh, there we go. He was born in Denmark, most likely in 1843. Came over to the United States when he was about 9. And he worked, he was a cooper. Oh, you scholars, what's a cooper?
Barrel
Barrel
maker.
maker.
Barrel maker. Later on, he worked in a grocery store. His father had a grocery store in Fells Point. Volunteered the outbreak of the Civil War, 1861. He joined something called the Purnell Legion, which was Maryland Union Force that fought. And it fought in separated companies. He was in a cavalry unit. Cavalry, I got that right? When you go to church, cavalry and cavalry. Cavalry unit. He was in a cavalry unit. Did not see much action until the Battle of Gettysburg. They were guarding a bridge near Frederick and they were told to come back towards Westminster, and they were coming by. They almost got captured by a Confederate unit, and they retreated into Gettysburg. And unfortunately, the day they retreated into Gettysburg was July 1st of 1863. So they were put to work as part of another unit, fought very well, and his unit has a monument at Gettysburg. It's Company A, Colonel Legion, Maryland Cavalry, Maryland's tribute to her son. After the war, I'm skipping ahead. In March of 1864, Martin was on a patrol, and he was captured by Confederate forces. He was sent to Andersonville, which was a horrible, horrible prison in Georgia. Awful death rate. It was just an awful place. He was paroled from there in November of 1864. He came back, as many people did, in a damaged condition. A lot of what we know now as PTSD, post-traumatic stress, was exhibited after the Civil War. It was the first time people really wrote about it much. Some of the Andersonville veterans committed suicide. Some of them wound up in asylums. Well, there's a case of one who spent the rest of his life working in his backyard building a scale model of Andersonville. And that was all he did. So around 1880, Martin, like a lot of people, wanted to get away from the city, get away from the hustle. Baltimore was a Confederate city in many ways, especially after the war. A lot of Confederates came up. And when you read some of the newspaper accounts, it's somewhat similar to some of the things you read now. There were accounts of Andersonville, and then people would call it fake news. It wasn't that bad. You know, and that sort of added to everybody's trauma. Martin moved out to what is now Holabird Avenue and bought a hotel that existed at Holabird and Sollers Point Road. It's called the Fairview Hotel. One of the things I didn't do was take a picture of it, because it's still there. It's from 1854, and he founded a settlement called Homburgville. And Homburgville is still there, most of it. There's a house he built in 1880. And he ran the hotel, got involved in real estate, and he died around 1919. So, okay, there's some Todds, some real Todds in Oaklawn. And they're related to the Lynches. We have a member of the Lynch family here. This is Benjamin Todd, who was a cousin to Thomas Todd, who lived here, Big Tom, son of Richard Todd. Richard Todd's buried out there. Benjamin and his wife Sarah, who was a Lynch. Sarah's a daughter of Joshua Lynch, who lived over in Lynch Manor. We had a little talk about this. She's a Lynch, but she doesn't know what branch of the Lynches she's from.
Where is Lynch Manor?
Lynch Manor, you know Dundalk? Do you know where the Weiss is, the new Weiss?
Yes.
Right behind it. There's a farmhouse behind that from about 1820, I think.
Oh, the carriage house. Yeah. Is that the one that has the carriage house?
No, I don't think it's a carriage house.
There's one right behind Weiss.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's right behind
They
it.
always said there was like two dwellings, and one was the carriage house, and one was the
I don't
main
know.
house. Maybe they were wrong.
There's a lot of things I don't know.
Yeah.
So things I do know, and I'm finding things out all the time, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so they lived up North Point Road a few miles. I don't have a picture of them, but this is a picture that we have in society of his parents' house. His mother was a Green. The Greens lived up about maybe where Wise Avenue meets North Point Boulevard. Anybody recognize the house? Supposed to be on Back River. And there was a Todd house torn down about 1959. Like I said, I'm always starting to learn. Okay. There's Merritt's buried there at Oaklawn. This is John A. Merritt. And he is the Merritt from Merritt Point. He was originally buried in the Methodist Meeting House Cemetery and was eventually moved over to Oaklawn. As were several lynches. Many lynches. Okay, now this is the Gorsuch family. These are the Sparrows Point Gorsuches. It's Martha and William S. And the Gorsuches lived on what is now Sparrows Point Country Club. You know, way back. And that's William S. And if anyone knows, the last Todd to live in this house was Clara Todd. She married John Gorsuch, that was his son. So this is Clara's father-in-law. And that's Martha. And this is W. Herbert Lynch. Gorsuch, he was done Lynch. He was police commissioner of Baltimore County at one point. And he was the last Gorsuch to live in the Gorsuch house. He died around 1930. He was chief of police in 1909 to 1913. And that was when, before the last expansion of Baltimore City, the county police headquarters was on Golden Street. And it's still there. But I didn't bring a picture of it. Okay, there's a couple of 1812 veterans. This one is Patrick Lynch. And his wife was Mary Ann Lynch. That's Patrick Lynch at his older age. The records I've seen is that he was with the 5th Regiment at North Point. And he lived in Sandy Plains, which was the Lynch estate. He did a lot of the renovation at Sandy Plains. And that's his wife. And a charming couple. Now, back in these pictures are probably from like 1850. So the thing was, you couldn't, move. But still, they look a little sour anyway on top of that. Another veteran of the War of 1812, this is the grave of Josiah Green. And as I said, the Green, he was an officer. Sometimes I see him as a major, sometimes as a lieutenant colonel. The Green family lived, again, up a few miles up the road, about Wise Avenue and North Point Boulevard. They go way back. Josias, as I said, was an officer at North Point, and one of the things about Josias is that he put in a claim after the war because when the British came up, they confiscated a couple of his slaves. So he's in the record book for that. His son was named Vincent Green. His son lived on that property, and his son is the one who cut down the tree where General Ross died, because he got tired of looking at it. And he died soon after. But anyway, that's the Greens. Okay, this is a very sad story. This is Eva Schmidt, and this is Sherlock Copper, John Sherlock Copper. We're talking 1918. They were going together, they were in love, and Eva lived right across from Oaklawn. Her father was named George Schmidt, and he was a marble cutter, and he did a lot of the work at Oaklawn. Sherlock here lived on Fort Avenue, down by Fort McHenry. He joined the Navy, came home on leave. This family story is that they wanted to get married, but her parents would not consent to the marriage. Just they thought Sherlock was beneath her. So what happened was, they were at his parents' house, like a dinner before he was going to go, back on duty. And he took her in a back room and shot her, and then shot himself.
Oh.
And they think it was a mutual pact because there was handwriting from both of them in the note, and their last wish was to be buried together. Which absolutely did not happen. This is her monument at Oaklawn. It's some of the most beautiful statuary in there. It's about, when you come in, if you go over to the right, it's about 50 feet up on the right. This happened in September of 1918. She was not quite 20. Her parents, George, and her mom both died the next year, within 3 weeks of each other. And I think the business carried on for a while. It really is gorgeous. This is all that. Now, Sherlock wasn't buried with her, but again, his parents lived in Fort McHenry. They buried him a couple hundred feet away. So that's probably as close as they could get. As I said, when you start researching stuff, the world's full of very sad stories. And going back, there's all sorts of things. You know, we look at the good old days or whatever, and sometimes they weren't all that hot. Okay, this is actually not at Oaklawn. This is in Normandy, France. It's George Schraber, who was with the 90th Infantry Division, and they landed at Utah Beach on D-Day. Initially fairly light casualties, but as the war ground on, they had one of the heaviest casualty numbers of any division. George was killed on D-Day. And the reason that I'm even having getting this in there is he has a cenotaph at Oaklawn. You know what a cenotaph is? It's a memorial where there's no actual body. So, there are a lot of World War II veterans, a lot of killed in action. There's World War I there too. I just didn't want this to go until 6 o'clock tonight. I'm sure you appreciate that. This is one of the, another one of my subjects, and I gave a talk here last year about bootlegging. This is the grave of Henry Bletcher, who was the chief bootlegger in our area. He lived on this Bletcher Road. He lived back in there. Part of his property, Rob Zackrell owns now. And Rob almost fell through a still that Henry had buried in his yard. He was a boxing promoter, and if you were at my last talk, you remember I had 45 pictures of the one boxer kept coming up. And so I didn't put them in. But he was a boxing promoter right up to Prohibition in 1919. He was into gambling. He was into bootlegging big time. He would bring it in on Back River, have it unloaded, shipped up to where it needed to be shipped. He had a house on Bond Street that they eventually raided, and the still he had in that house was so large they had to tear the house down to get it down. There's a vacant lot on Bond Street, and that's where his house was. So, and that's mature Henry Bletcher, and that's the young gangster. He's a very interesting character, but I mean, he did some things, people died and stuff like that, but so I don't want to glorify him too much. And I snapped a couple of pictures of some of the statuary there, and some of it's just gorgeous. And everything here has, and I don't know what a lot of these mean, but whatever they have clutched in their hands or whatever, has a meaning. And this is the Holy Family. They look a little bit creepy to me. And I want to say this. Like I said, I go through cemeteries and do a lot of stuff. Occasionally I stray into something irreverent or, Now this angel is, I do know what this is. She's writing in the Book of Life. So if you're written down in the Book of Life, you're in good shape. If you're not, it's going to get a little more. This is Mary, and this is one of my favorite statues. It just looks like the first reel of a horror movie. She just has that. There's a machete under there. And again, this is the holy mother of God, so I apologize. Okay, this guy is, he actually lived off of Back River Lake Road, and his name is Gottlieb Koenig. And they actually, if you're in the German, they got the umlaut over the O. This thing. See the anvil up here? And there's your hammer. So guess what his occupation was?
Blacksmith.
No. He owned a saloon. I have no idea. Maybe there was a sale. I don't know.
Walked right into that one, didn't you, Sarah?
That's weird. There was an article about him in the paper. He was arrested for spitting on the street corner. And it must have been a significant expectoration. So they took him to court, and he went up and testified and said, I could not have possibly done that because I don't smoke. And to bring up a wad of phlegm like that, you have to be a smoker. So the judge is about to dismiss the case when the bailiff comes rushing out and tells the judge that he saw Mr. Koenig putting out a cigar right before the case. So he was convicted, but not of perjury. So he was a serial expectorator. This is a statue of a World War I soldier. It's a beautiful piece of work. The guy's name is Leroy Cullum. He went over with the 313th Infantry Division, Regiment, and saw extensive combat in World War I, came back, and this was never right after that, and wound up dying around 1935. And they didn't come out and say it in the paper, but the implication was suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This guy's not buried in Oaklawn either. His name is John Strasbourg. He came. He came to Sparrows Point from the York, Pennsylvania area around 1891 to work in the predecessor of Bethlehem Steel, which is Maryland Steel. And he died in 1907. He's buried in York. He had 11 kids. And a lot of those kids had kids. And just about every Strasbourg you know, including that one, is descended from John Strasbourg. And there's two of his kids are buried here. That's Harry and his wife Jeanette, and George and Burton. This to me is kind of interesting. I'd love to know the story about this. This guy's name is Samuel Wilson. His wife is Minerva Hancock. Samuel Wilson is the great-grandson of James Wilson, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence from Pennsylvania. Minerva, you might guess, is the great-great-granddaughter of John Hancock.
Wow.
Kind of a weird pairing. And it says, under him, renowned cornetist, trumpet player, pharmacologist. He was traveling, like went around traveling bands around the area. And he had a drugstore, Harford and 25th Street. Minerva, it says under here, God's angel loaned to Sam for 47 short, happy years, died suddenly from the heat, August 14th, 1947. And under here it says, never a cross word, Minnie, yes, I miss you, want, need, love you, but God called you home. And that's his saying. Kind of pathetic. And I don't believe this for a minute. Married for 47 years and never a cross word. No. Okay, here's another sad story. This young man in front, his name is Robert Campbell. He was a grandson of a saloon keeper across the street from Palmberg. There used to be this place called Campbell's Hotel. You'd have to be pretty old to know where Campbell's Hotel is. It's now part of the parking lot of Squires. And Robert joined the Boy Scouts. This is a picture out in front of the old St. Luke's Lutheran Church, which was on Dundalk Avenue. They built a new church since then. Right about the time this picture was taken, shortly after, one of the local delivery men came around and asked the kids if they wanted to go swimming. So a bunch of them said yes, and Robert went to jump off onto the back of his truck, slipped off, and died. So that's his. He was buried in his Boy Scout uniform, and a statue of him. These happy stories. And this is a mystery, and one of the challenging things about a cemetery like Oaklawn is if you go in the office and ask questions, they don't know anything. It says, in memory of William McCubbin, who departed this life April 24th, 1803, age 61 years, 9 months, and 24 days. He's right inside the back gate of Oaklawn. And, of course, there were people who were transplanted from other cemeteries after Oaklawn opened. But he's in the middle of a pauper's grave. And what the woman in Oaklawn told me was that she thinks it was here before Oaklawn. Okay. So who was William McCubbin? This is one of the things we have on William McCubbin. A horse was stolen from his stable. He called it the head of Back River. It's actually called Diamond Point. Anybody familiar with Diamond Point?
Yeah.
It's about the last thing on the Dundalk side of Back River before you go in. He apparently had about 1,000 acres of land, so that could have been part of his burial ground. It might be close enough. But nobody, I haven't come across anything to indicate why he happens to be buried there. Okay, this is another unusual thing about Oaklawn. If you come into Oaklawn and up on the right, you see like a big green field with nothing on it. This boulder is the beginning of it. It's this replica of the old Methodist burying ground on Philadelphia Road. Established 1830, relocated here 1935. What happened was, there was an old cemetery up Orleans and Elwood Street. It's when you come down from downtown, from the viaduct and come down Orleans Street, it's right before it all merges back into Route 4. When they were building that, there were two cemeteries in the way of the road. One of them was a Catholic cemetery, and one of them was a Methodist burying ground. So they came up with the idea of digging them up and moving them. How they got to Oaklawn, nobody knows. But there are about 2,000 graves in Oaklawn that are. And they opened the playground up on the. This was the second time the Catholics had been moved. The Catholics are in New Cathedral Cemetery. They were from St. Patrick's Church. And then this is up from the 30s when and this is the ground today. It is still a playground. Okay, I have reached the end of the phone. Have any questions?
So Ruth Todd Boggs,
Yes.
who is on our board, and she's
Yes.
Todd descendant. She had hoped to be here today, but she sent me an email that said, funny story about Oaklawn.
Yes, I know the story.
Okay, my great-grandparents, Ben and Leah Sparks, she was a Merritt, were going to be part of Founder's Circle until they realized a saloon was across the street. Being strict Methodists, they changed their burial sites to Druid Hill, all the way over in Pikesville.
Yes.
And their daughter was C. Matilda Sparks, a brilliant mathematician and
Yes.
physicist, and she's buried with them there.
Yes.
But they wouldn't be buried in Oaklawn because
No.
there was a saloon.
Now, his father's buried there. Ben Sparks' father's buried there.
Oh, okay.
And it's called the Grade Circle, or the Founders Circle. If it's very close to the main building there. It's a circle, and a lot of the farm families are buried around, including the Greens. A lot of the Lynches, Merritts. John Abraham Merritt, I showed you a picture, was Ruth's great-great-grandfather on the other side. But yeah, they did not. There was a bar across the street. It was called Lambert's. Lawrence's Roadhouse, and it had been there forever. And it's where the Moe's Seafood is. That's actually a building from the 1890s. And he had I guess he started as a beer garden at Kennel Park. It's called Lawrence's Park. And none of you are old enough to remember that. But that's where Ringling Brothers used to be. The circus when they would come. So we have pictures of elephants going up Eastern Avenue. It's pretty neat. Any other questions?
Why would all these people be buried at Oaklawn instead of in their homesteads?
Well, some of the original farmers were buried in the Methodist Church, the Meeting House Cemetery. The Green family was buried at their homesteads. It's one of the other stories I don't know. Is that sometime, probably in the early 60s, they relocated the Green family cemetery to Oaklawn. So some of that happened. Up until about the 1850s, it would either be a homestead type of thing or it'd be a churchyard. And in the 1850s were the advent of what they called garden cemeteries. The first one was Mount Auburn in Boston. Greenmount is a garden cemetery also. The concept was you could come in, bring a picnic lunch, meet and greet with the dearly departed, hang out there, and that kind of thing. So it's just an evolution of, I guess, society that people aren't buried like that. And there's laws now too. You can't just bury somebody in your backyard anymore. Much as I would want to.
So is the fact that the Todds can still be buried here because that's owned by Oaklawn, our cemetery?
Yeah, this cemetery is actually part of Oaklawn,
Okay.
not here. I don't know how any of those rules work.
Okay.
A lot of things I don't know.
But I guess since it's part of Oaklawn, they
Yeah,
know, they
I
know
don't
the
how
rules.
they would get. I guess you would have to buy the lot from Oaklawn if there's any left. Not here.
The Green family, behind the senior center, isn't that Green Cove there?
It's called Green Hill.
Green Hill Cove.
Hill, just like the road.
Okay.
I was wondering about that. I was going up there yesterday. I was wondering about that. I don't know. There's things I don't know. One of the things I do know is that the roads back there, there's Martha, there's Alice, there's Grace. They are three of the Lynch daughters.
Right, they remember.
William
Yes,
Rogers
they were.
Lynch had that land, and then when he died, they sold it for development. So they named 4 of the streets after the Lynch daughters.
Okay.
But I was thinking about the other day. That's a definite maybe. But yes,
Did you research, identify a Titanic survivor that's buried in Oaklawn?
I did not.
Ada Ball.
Okay.
She
She'll be
survived
on
the
next.
sinking. She came over to America to be a domestic servant, and because her husband had died in England, and she married Perrine. I think he was a doctor in Baltimore, and she wound up buried in Oaklawn. So she's there.
Oh, wow.
So, like I said, there's always things that come up. There's always things. I didn't know about the suicide story. I came on that by accident. There's another suicide story of they're actually buried in Sports Cemetery, which is on O'Donnell Street. Somewhat similar, but this guy was dating a girl